Let's start with a moment in Luke chapter 2, which tells us what Caesar decided to do. He gathered together the soldiers of Rome and made a decree to send people home. The census he'd take from the place of their birth would help him to know what his empire was worth. The soldiers unfolded a long legal scroll, dictated by Caesar, the man in control. These are the words that the soldiers then read, the words that the Emperor Caesar had said.
Caesar must know what his emperor is worth, so register now at the place of your birth.
Caesar, of course, had plans for himself to tax their belongings and increase his wealth. Now one man called Joseph, this man was a gem.
That's me.
He needed to travel to Bethlehem. He went with his wife, who was gentle and mild, but heavenly laden, as she was with child. Though terrible timing, they had to endeavour to travel to Bethlehem, both together.
I'll rewind a bit as they're walking to town. I'll tell you of the day an angel came down and mentioned to Mary, an unmarried lady, that she was expecting God's very own baby.
Of course she was worried. As you'd expect, let's face it, her marriage plans could have been wrecked. But thankfully Joseph was spoken to, so instead of creating a hullabaloo, he stood by young Mary, knowing what she'd been chosen by God.
Anyway, back to the story in hand, where Mary and Joseph had reached his homeland. They'd travelled so far, it was such a long way, they desperately needed a place to stay.
So, Joseph knocked at the first door. He opened it ajar, and a head popped round. The innkeeper listened while Joseph said,
Do you have a lovely warm bed?
The innkeeper answered,
I'm sorry, but no, you have to go.
So Joseph and Mary walked down the street, looking so tired they were dragging their feet. They stopped at the next inn and knocked at the door. Then Joseph repeated what he'd asked before. The innkeeper stood there and calmly said,
I'm sorry, we're nothing. Not one single one. Not until at least some guests have gone.
Without hesitation, he pointed away and left them to find somewhere else to stay. So off went poor Mary and Joseph again and knocked on another door down the lane. The innkeeper heard them and came to the door, and Joseph repeated what he'd asked before.
Mary was desperate. She'd something to say.
Please, sir, we have to have somewhere to stay. Anywhere. Please, sir, we really don't mind. There has to be somewhere you can find.
The innkeeper thought, then pointed and said,
I suppose you could sleep in the cattle shed.
So Mary and Joseph walked over that way and settled to rest in the hay. And just in time, too. After the very next morn, something amazing happened. Jesus was born.
So, holding him closely and safe in her hands, she wrapped him up warmly in swaddling bands, then laid him to sleep in a manger bed where usually all of the animals fed. Shh!